Imagine this. You're at home. The doors are locked. The windows are shut. You're completely alone. Or are you? Today we dive into the true and bone-chilling stories of froggers turned murderers. It was September 1941 in a quiet neighborhood in Denver, Colorado. The house belonged to Philip Peters, who was described as a kind, elderly man. At the time, Peters was staying alone in the house. His wife, Helen, was recovering in the hospital after breaking her hip. Theodore Coneys and Philip Peters originally met at the Denver Guitar Club. Theodore Coneys, a frail, homeless man who had been told he wouldn't live past 18 due to his poor health, had a deep-seated resentment towards the world and longed for a place where he could be alone. He was a man who lived on the fringes of society, and he was about to make a home in the most terrifying place imaginable. Coneys went to Peters' home, who was away at the time, intending to ask his former acquaintance for a handout, and instead found his way inside to steal food and money. Coneys didn't just break in, he disappeared. He found a small trapdoor in the ceiling of a closet, a tiny entrance to a narrow attic cubbyhole. It was the perfect hiding spot. For 5 long weeks, Coneys lived in the hidden space, listening to every sound, watching every movement of the unsuspecting homeowner from his eerie perch above. He would slip down in the middle of the night to steal food from the refrigerator, but he was always gone before morning, the perfect ghost. But the ghost story took a terrifying turn on October 17, 1941. Philip Peters returned home and discovered Coneys in the kitchen, raiding his refrigerator. Peters, armed with a cane, struck at Coneys, but he was no match. Coneys had an old pistol he had found in the house and clubbed Peters. When the gun broke, he continued the brutal attack with a heavy iron stove shaker. He bludgeoned the 73-year-old man to death. And then, he simply returned to his attic cubbyhole. When police arrived, they found the doors and windows locked from inside, with no signs of forced entry. It was a complete mystery. Even though they noticed the small trapdoor, they dismissed it, believing no one could possibly fit through it. The crime scene was an impossible puzzle. Peter's wife, who had been in the hospital, returned home with the housekeeper. They started hearing strange sounds, creaks in the floorboards, a shuffling sound from above. The housekeeper was convinced the house was haunted and quickly quit. Mrs. Peters, too, eventually gave up and moved away. The house became vacant, but Coneys remained, the sole occupant, his crimes blamed on ghosts and neighborhood pranks. This went on for 9 months. 9 months of a murderer living in the very home where he committed his crime. The legend of the ghost grew, and on July 30th, 1942, a police officer on a routine check heard the distinct click of a lock on the 2nd floor. He rushed upstairs and saw the unmistakable sight of a man's legs disappearing through a small trap door. The officer grabbed them and pulled them down. The ghost was no ghost at all. It was Theodore Coneys. He confessed to the murder and to his horrifying secret life in the attic. His twisted tale shocked the nation. The police detective on the case remarked that a man would have to be a spider to stand it up there that long. The nickname stuck. Theodore Coneys became known as the Denver Spider-Man. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. In 1986, Frank Bowen lived in a quiet Massachusetts home with his 2 daughters, Tina and Karen. For weeks, the girls had been telling him that strange things were happening. Misplaced objects, strange noises, and food missing. Frank, a skeptical father, thought that they were just watching too many scary movies. But the fear became impossible to ignore on December 8th. Frank, his daughters, and a friend, Kathleen, discovered a chilling sign that someone was indeed there. They returned home that night to find all the lights, TVs, and radios on. With his heart pounding, Frank searched the house, and upstairs in a closet is where he was faced with a chilling sight. A young man, later identified as Daniel LaPlante, was hiding there, wearing a fur coat with spiky hair and face paint. He had a hatchet in his hand, and Frank calmly ushered the girls into a bedroom and locked the door. Tina, in a moment of panic and bravery, took a chance. She jumped out a window and ran to a neighbor's house to call for help. The police arrived, but LaPlante was gone. The family stayed at a hotel that night for safety. The next day, Frank wanted to return home to retrieve some items and requested a police escort. They spotted someone in the window, and the police entered to search it. Upstairs, they found a knife plunged into a family photo with a message scrawled on it: "I'm still here. Come find me." There was a second photo with an even more terrifying promise written: "I'm going to kill you all." The police searched the house, and there was no trace of LaPlante. One officer insisted that he had to be inside the home. While they were searching in a laundry room, they found a small opening in the wall, and that's where they found him hiding, and he was arrested. As it turned out, Tina knew LaPlante. He was given her number by some friends, and they talked on the phone for months. At an 8th grade school event, he introduced himself to her, and she was not at all interested after she saw him in person. LaPlante was held in a juvenile facility until his mother remortgaged their home to pay his $10,000 bail. Less than a month after his release, his crimes escalated beyond anything imaginable. On December 1st, 1987, LaPlante returned to the home of Andrew and Priscilla Gustafson. He had previously broken in to steal, but this time, he was there to kill. He murdered Priscilla, who was several months pregnant, and then drowned her 2 children, 7-year-old Abigail and 5-year-old William. A police officer would find the children's bodies in separate bathtubs. Following LaPlante's arrest for the murders, Frank Bowen expressed his anger that the teen was ever released in the first place, telling a newspaper, "If Daniel LaPlante does not get convicted and gets out again, I will personally kill him." He and his daughters had lived in perpetual fear since their encounter. Daniel LaPlante was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. After a 2013 ruling made it unconstitutional to sentence juveniles to life without parole, LaPlante sought a reduction in his sentence. He stood in court and offered an apology. He said he was truly sorry and expressed his profound sorrow, acknowledging he had murdered 3 innocent people and robbed an unborn child of his first breath. But for the family, an apology isn't hardly enough. The state's expert psychiatrist testified that LaPlante showed no empathy during their 8-hour interview, calling his apology a presentation. He described LaPlante's action as systemic, pointing out that LaPlante went home and ate pie after his murders. The doctor diagnosed LaPlante with antisocial personality disorder and said his actions were not impulsive or scattered, but the direct result of a violent nature he had shown even as a teen. He emphasized these murders had nothing to do with his youth, his age. Carol Gustafson, who married Andrew after the murders, said the nightmare plagued him all his life, and that Andrew could not forgive LaPlante, even from his deathbed in 2014. Carol begged the judge, "Do not let this man out. He is a menace and a threat to society. He should rot in prison." And as of 2025, that's where he remains. Paradise, that's what comes to mind when you think of Hawaii. But for one family, a move to the beautiful island of Oahu turned into a living nightmare. This is the story of the Campbells, a family who discovered that true terror wasn't lurking in the darkness outside, but had been silently living inside their home for weeks, maybe even months. In 2019, James, a U.S. Navy man, and his wife Brittany were excited to start a new life in Hawaii with their 2 young sons. Their new 2-story house near Honolulu Airport was everything that they had dreamed of, but a week-long vacation would shatter their dreams forever. On September 20th, 2019, they returned home to a bizarre sight. James' bike was sitting outside in front of their house. James tried to open the front door, but it wouldn't budge. A voice from inside calmly said, "This is not your house." James and Brittany were floored. A stranger was inside their home, trying to keep them out. While Brittany called 911, James managed to force the man outside. In the front yard, they got a look at the intruder. He was wearing James' clothes. Police arrived and arrested the man, who was later identified as Ezequiel Zayas. He was charged with burglary, but the real horror began after he was taken away. The house was a scene of utter chaos. Pots and pans were scattered precariously in the kitchen. James and Brittany's bedroom was completely trashed. It was clear that this was more than a simple break-in. The couple then discovered their old laptop. On it, Zayas typed disturbing diary entries and a manifesto detailing insidious plans for the family. He called them perfect people and wrote about a hand transplant and sexual reconstruction surgeries. The man had wanted to play doctor on them, as Brittany would later describe. He even recorded a video of himself naked, sitting on Brittany's chair. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a premeditated invasion. The diary entries contained deeply personal details about the family, including Brittany's fertility treatments, something they had told no one. It became clear that Zayas had been living in the house for much longer than a week, and they began to remember strange incidents. Doors left unlocked, their dog barking at night for no reason, and their computer's webcam randomly turning on. It was unclear how Zayas got in, but he had been living a silent, terrifying life from within the walls of the Campbells' home. Zayas would eventually plead guilty to a series of crimes, including the August 2020 murder of a fellow inmate, and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. But for the Campbells, the damage was done. They have since moved away from Hawaii, their lives uprooted and their sense of security shattered. On the surface, the story of Dolly Oestrreich is a classic tale of a wealthy housewife, a cheating heart, and a shocking murder. But what if the most twisted part of the story weren't about what happened in the open, but what happened in secret? This is the bizarre tale of Walburga Dolly Oestrreich, a woman whose love affair took a turn so strange, so unbelievable, that it earned her lover the nickname the Batman. Dolly was an attractive, charismatic German immigrant who married a wealthy textile manufacturer named Fred. By all accounts, she was popular and loved, but she lived a double life. While Fred was away at work, she entertained a series of lovers in their home. In 1913, at the age of 33, she met a 17-year-old sewing machine repairman named Otto Sonnhuber, who often worked at Oestrreich's factory. One day, she called her husband to tell him her sewing machine wasn't working, and Otto was sent out to fix it, and that's when their intense love affair began. To keep their relationship secret from the neighbors, and more importantly from her husband, Dolly came up with the wild idea. Otto would move in, not as a guest, but as a ghost. He would live in the attic, accessible through a panel in their bedroom's closet. For Fred, the attic was just a dusty space. For Dolly and Otto, it was a secret world. Otto, supplied with a cot, books, and writing materials, would live in total silence while Fred was home. He would later say that during his time, he was Dolly's sex slave, and they would have sex up to 8 times a day. In 1918, the Oestrreichs moved to Los Angeles. Dolly agreed on one condition: she would pick the house, and it had to have an attic. Otto moved in before the couple even arrived, and the bizarre affair continued right above Fred's head. On July 22, 1922, everything changed. Fred and Dolly got into a loud fight, and Otto, fearing for Dolly's safety, emerged from the attic. He grabbed 2 pistols from their bureau, and in the ensuing chaos, shot and killed Fred. Dolly and Otto quickly staged the scene to look like a robbery, with Otto locking Dolly in the closet, who reported that one of Fred's watches was stolen. Police suspected Dolly, but couldn't figure out how she locked herself in. The mystery remained unsolved. Fred's death wasn't the end of Otto's time in the attic. He continued to live there for 8 more years, writing stories and only coming down when Dolly was alone. But things started to unravel. Dolly began a new affair with her lawyer, Herman Shapiro. Her web of lies grew more tangled, and her new lover became suspicious. He confronted her about a diamond watch she gave him that she claimed was stolen during the burglary. Later, another one of her lovers, Roy Klum, told the police that she had given him a gun to get rid of in the La Brea tar pits. The other gun she had persuaded a neighbor to bury in their yard. The police recovered both guns, and Dolly was arrested. While in jail, Dolly confessed her biggest secret to Shapiro. She asked him to check in on her vagabond half-brother, living in her attic. Shapiro, skeptical, went to the house and knocked on the attic trapdoor. A pale, thin man named Otto Sonnhuber greeted him and confessed everything. The story hit the papers, and the world was shocked by the bizarre truth. Otto was tried and found guilty for manslaughter, but was ultimately released because the statute of limitation had expired. Dolly's trial resulted in a hung jury, and the charges were dropped. The lovers were free. This unsettling story shows just how far people will go to keep a secret, and how a seemingly normal home can be a cage for dark desires. Otto Sonnhuber married and lived the rest of his life under a new name. Dolly Oestrreich remained in Los Angeles, and shortly before her death, she married the man she had been with for 30 years. The next time you come home to something that doesn't feel quite right, or hear a strange sound in the middle of the night, remember these stories, because you just might never know what or who might be living in your home.